Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about why I will never play DCC. Alright, so what is DCC? DCC is Dungeon Crawl Classics, and it's part of the OSR, the Old School Rules Renaissance, the Old School Rules set. And OSR is really, really interesting. It's dedicated, it has a lot of weird directions that it's going all at once. I think OSR is dedicated to simplicity. I think OSR is dedicated to a celebration of 1970s Dungeons and Dragons, honoring 1970s Dungeons and Dragons, right? And there's a lot of games that are OSR that are really doing fairly well doing very well in the tabletop role-playing game space. DCC is one of them. It's got a lot of fans, a lot of respect, a lot of people love that game, right? Another one is OSE. That's coming up hard. Old School Essentials. People love that game, man. White Hack is another one. Black Hack is another one. And a few people like Basic. Is it the Basic Role Playing BRP? Basic Role Playing System is the one that came from Chaosium. There's some love on that. I have to say, one of my favorite, of course, Dungeons and Dragons is my favorite role-playing game. I would say my second favorite tabletop role-playing game, and the reason why D&D is my favorite is I will never forget. None of this exists without it, right? So if you want to like march off in a huff and be like, I don't like D&D, whatever cooler game you're playing that's cooler than Dungeons and Dragons, it wouldn't exist if Dungeons and Dragons wasn't there. So just like check yourself, right? Like remember that, right? So my favorite tabletop role-playing game beyond, the great originator is Index Card RPG, and it is an OSR game. It plays very OSR. It's incredibly light, incredibly simple, right? But I will never play Dungeons Crawl Classics. I'm 100% aware of it. I've watched it as it's come up, but I've been convinced by a recent YouTube video I watched that I will never play DCC, and here's why. So I watched a role-playing game, a tabletop role-playing game video by Aaron the Pedantic. By the way, I do not really sign off on a lot of Aaron the Pedantic's views beyond the OSR. I think when it comes to the OSR, I think he really knows what he's doing, and he has a lot of OSR knowledge. And he is very good at communicating it, right? And I really think he is an OSR expert, right? And he has a lot of passion for the OSR, and I respect that, right? He has a lot of life advice and a lot of advice on things that go beyond tabletop role-playing games that I don't really sign off on, but I think he's a really smart guy, and I think he did something recently that I really thought was fascinating. He curses a lot in his videos. I'm an evangelical Christian, right? So I really dig your OSR stuff, but I wish there was a lot less spicy words. But I don't even bother telling people this anymore because so many people curse constantly. And I'm also aware that a lot of people aren't even aware that not cursing is like an option or like a thing that people care about. But if you're religious, you generally don't like people cursing, right? And one of his commenter, one of the people who watches one of his fans, one of his subscribers said, "Hey, could you curse less?" And I could believe it. He said, "I'm actually going to try to do this a little less." He didn't say, "I'll never curse again." But the fact that he even acknowledged it and thought about it, I was very impressed. So he's an interesting guy. I don't sign off on everything he believes in or all his opinions, but and he's got some opinions that are a little out there, right? But when it comes to OSR, he definitely knows what he's talking about. I think his passion is really genuine. And but he did this video on DCC, and I listened to the whole thing, the Dungeon Crawl Classics, and he said this one thing. He's like, when you're doing a DCC, you go through a funnel, right? Now, I know what a funnel is, right? Funnel is a thing in some OSR games where they're like, oh, you build 6 characters. Maybe one's going to live, right? Right out of the gate, I'm not down with this, right? If I invest my time in making a character, I want it to live, right? And I want that character to live. And so he said, not only do you go through these funnels in the early versions of the game so fast, these builds are very, very quick, and you could build these characters with you'd randomly generate them, right? And I'm like, I got no interest in playing a randomly generated, dirt farmer who has a hoe that he uses like an axe. Like this does not sound fun, right? And he's like, so you go through these funnels and you use these characters up so much that you don't even name them. And I'm like, done, I'm out. I will never play DCC. Any game that gives you a license or an excuse to not name your player character, forget it. I am out, right? Here's why. I had a player Guy was the best friend in the world. I really liked him. He wasn't my best friend. He was a very good friend. He felt like a best friend at times, and I miss this guy because I don't really hang around with him anymore. But he was a good friend and an interesting person, and he was a terrible, terrible, terrible tabletop role-playing game player. So he'd get on with me back in the days when we were close, and he'd talk for 2 hours about a build. And like he'd be like, it's a half elf, and it's got 2 levels of bard, and it's got 2 levels of fighter, and I'm going to take it through this build selection, and it's going to have these feats, and I'm going to choose these spells, and I'm going to choose these weapons, and it does this much damage. And I was like, dude, what's this character's name? I don't know. And I'm like, dude, man, I was done. I'm like, what the friggledy frack? Like, this does not make sense, homie, right? Like, why? Like, if you care that much about your build and you can't take 30 seconds to go to a name generator and get a name and attach it, the reality is just go back to video games. You have no business in tabletop role-playing games, right? If it's all about the build and you do not care about the narrative, not only are you not going to care about your narrative, you probably aren't going to care about the DM's narrative, and you probably aren't going to care about the other players' narratives either, right? You're there to make a configuration out of the D&D rules, right? And frankly, I ain't there for you, right? Like, you can do that. Go play, Baldur's Gate on PlayStation 3 or whatever, whatever it ran on, right? I'm not there for that, right? I want to know your player character's name. I want to know if he has brothers or sisters. I want that long backstory, and I want it from every player character at the table, and I am there for story. I am there for narrative. Narrative first, build last, right? And if DCC is fine with you building a character you never even name, I'm out, right? I will never waste my time on it, right? And Aaron the Pedantic, when he's talking about OSRs, there's not many people can match him. He's very, very smart. He's very passionate about OSR, right? He's got some other views. Seriously, I don't sign off on a lot of his other views. But when it comes to OSR, he's there, right? And frankly, he just said why he loves DCC. But all I heard was like, oh, in this game, you don't even have to name your character. Done. Out. And honestly, I will say, Aaron the Pedantic really saved me some trouble, right? Because, because I know a lot of good people really love DCC. And I'm not saying that they're not good. I cannot get down with build over narrative. I just can't. The story matters. And if it doesn't matter to you, frankly, I'm not sure I want you at my table. And I'll tell you, that player, he's no longer at my table, right? I didn't kick him out for that. I gave him a lot of chances. But the reality is, at the end of the day, it came very clear that he did not care. He did care about my narrative. He would not respect the narrative of other players, and that's why he ended up being nixed out of the game. And frankly, he was a good friend to me, right? But the reality is, if we don't have a shared interest, we don't have something we're spending time on, I just ain't gonna see you, right? Like, and once there's no time really being spent. Now, if this guy showed up my door and said, "Hey, I need $300 cash," I'd pull it out of my pocket and give it to him in a New York second. Right? He's still my friend, but the reality is, we just don't spend any time together, and the reality is, you got to care about narrative. It's important, right? All that's my opinion. What do you think? Do you think what I think, that narrative matters, and no game in the world should ever put build before narrative, and that DCC is putting build before narrative, and frankly, it's not worth playing for anybody who cares about narrative? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.